The sky was still the pale, muted blue of early morning as I made my way to the bus stop. The air was crisp, with a hint of autumn's chill, but it was the kind of morning that promised a warm, sunny afternoon. The trees that lined the street were starting to turn, their leaves tinged with the first hints of red and gold. I smiled to myself, thinking how perfect the day would be. A day full of possibilities, of adventure. I arrived at the corner where the bus stop sign stood, its paint peeling slightly, the metal cool under my hand as I leaned against it. No one else was around yet, just the faint sounds of the neighborhood waking up. A car door slamming in the distance, a dog barking somewhere down the street. The quiet was comforting, a gentle hum that made the anticipation even sweeter. I looked up the street, knowing it wouldn't be long now. Andy was always on time, a trait that made me like him even more. Some kids would dawdle, dragging their feet on the way to school, but not Andy. He was responsible, dependable, the kind of kid who'd be a good influence on a friend, if only he had the right kind of friend. I checked my watch. 7:45, right on schedule. Andy would be rounding the corner any minute now, his backpack slung over one shoulder, too cool to wear it properly. I could picture him clearly, his brown hair a little tousled, his jeans slightly too long, the cuffs frayed from dragging on the pavement. He was a good kid, the kind who would listen to reason if you put it to him the right way. I smiled again, thinking about the day I had planned for us. We'd head to the park first, the one by the river, with the big oak tree that's perfect for climbing. Andy was the adventurous type, always up for a challenge, and I knew he'd love the idea of skipping school for a day of freedom. Who wouldn't? The thought of sitting in a stuffy classroom all day, when the world outside was calling, was just too much to bear. We'd climb the oak tree high enough to see the river winding through the town, the water sparkling in the sunlight. Maybe we'd bring a picnic, something simple, peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, some apples, a couple of sodas. We'd sit up there, high above the ground, and talk about all the things that mattered to both Andy and me. Maybe I'd tell him some stories too, the kind that make you shiver a little, but in a good way. Everyone loves stories like that. After the park, we could head to the arcade. It was a bit out of the way, but I knew the owner, an old family friend, who'd let us in early before the place got crowded. Andy loved video games. I'd seen him playing at the corner store, his face lit up by the screen, lost in whatever world the game created. I'd let him play as much as he wanted, quarters on me. We'd spend hours there, just the two of us, no one else around to bother us. Then, if we had time, we might go down to the old train tracks. There was something about the place that was both exciting and a little bit dangerous, the perfect spot for an adventure. We'd walk along the tracks, balancing on the rails like tightrope walkers, talking about everything and nothing. Maybe we'd find something interesting, an old coin, or a piece of a broken bottle, something we could keep as a souvenir of the day. And all the while, I'd be planting the seed in Andy's mind that skipping school wasn't so bad, that it could even be fun. I'd tell him how school would always be there, waiting. But days like this were special, the kind you remember forever. I'd tell him how important it was to seize the day, to take advantage of opportunities when they came. I heard footsteps then, the light, quick steps of someone in a hurry. I looked up, and there he was, just as I'd imagined him. Andy. He looked exactly as I'd pictured, brown hair falling into his eyes, backpack slung carelessly over one shoulder, the cuffs of his jeans dragging on the ground. He was a little out of breath, as if he'd been running, but he smiled when he saw me. "Hey," I said, as he stopped in front of me. "You're here just in time?" "Yeah," he replied, grinning. Then there was an awkward pause. "Ready for school?" I asked. He shrugged, looking down at his feet. "I guess." I could tell from his tone that he wasn't really in the mood for school today. Perfect. "You know," I said, leaning in a little closer, "I've been thinking, today is too nice a day to waste sitting in a classroom. What do you say we blow off school and do something fun instead?" Andy looked up at me, surprised. "Skip school?" "Yeah, just this once. Think about it. No teachers, no homework, just a day of doing whatever we want. We could go to the park, climb that big oak tree, or maybe hit the arcade. I know the guy who runs it. He'd let us in early, just the two of us." Andy hesitated, chewing on his lip. "I don't know. My mom would be mad if she found out." "She doesn't have to know," I said, keeping my voice light, casual. "We'd be back before she even realizes you missed the bus. And think about it. What's one day? You'll be back at school tomorrow, none the worse for wear. But today could be something special. A day you remember for the rest of your life." Andy looked at me, his eyes searching mine. I kept my expression calm, reassuring. This was the critical moment, the point where I had to be careful not to push too hard, but also not to let him slip away. "We could go to the tracks," I added, a little more quietly. "You know, the old ones, down by the river. I heard there's a spot where you can find old coins, things people dropped a long time ago. We might find something really cool." That seemed to pique his interest. Andy's eyes lit up a little, and he smiled. Just a small smile, but it was enough. "That sounds kind of fun," he admitted. "It will be," I promised, feeling a thrill of excitement. "But it's up to you, Andy. The bus will be here any minute, and we can either get on it, or we can have a day to ourselves. Just you and me." He looked down the street where the bus would be coming from, then back at me. I could see the wheels turning in his head, the decision forming. I just had to wait, let him come to it on his own. The minutes ticked by, each one feeling like an eternity. I watched Andy carefully, every twitch of his face, every shift in his posture. He was close, so close to saying yes. Then, in the distance, I heard the rumble of the bus, growing louder as it approached. Andy heard it too, his eyes flicking nervously between the sound of the bus and my face. I smiled at him, trying to convey nothing but warmth, safety, and the promise of a good time. Finally, the bus rounded the corner, its bright yellow bulk filling the street. It slowed as it neared the stop, the brakes hissing as it came to a halt in front of us. The door opened with a creak, the driver staring straight ahead, waiting. Andy took a step toward the bus, then paused, turning back to me, his expression uncertain. "Are you sure?" he began, his voice trailing off. "I'm sure, Andy. It'll be the best day ever, just you and me. But it's your choice. No pressure." He stood there, on the edge of decision, the bus idling beside us, the door still open, waiting. I held my breath, the moment stretching out, the tension almost unbearable. Andy looked at the bus, then back at me. His hand tightened on the strap of his backpack, his knuckles white. "So, what do you say?" And then, just as he opened his mouth to speak, the driver called out, "You getting on, kid?" Andy hesitated, caught between two worlds, two futures. I waited, every nerve in my body alive with anticipation, my eyes locked on his face, willing him to choose, to make the right choice. And then, the bus engine revved, the door still open, waiting. Andy turned to face me, his decision made. But before he could say anything, the bus honked its horn, loud and jarring, shattering the moment. The door was still open, the bus driver watching us with narrowed eyes. Andy glanced at me one last time, his expression unreadable. Then he turned and stepped onto the bus. The door closed behind him with a final, definitive thud, and the bus pulled away, leaving me standing there alone. I watched as it disappeared down the street, taking Andy with it, the day slipping through my fingers like sand. But as I stood there, a small smile crept across my face.
That foolish boy would come around eventually. There was always tomorrow.